And now it's time for
a tiny bite
of knowledge.
Hey, Jodi, I'm just looking around at some imagery today. Do you know some good sources for some imagery as I'm trying to work with some of my agricultural data? What's your favorite place to get a background image?
Yeah, that's a very good question. And if I'm in the United States looking to do something with background imagery to make like a boundary on something that's really good and georeferenced, I will usually look for something called a NAIP image.
What is a NAIP image?
They are images flown by the USDA FSA, and they stand for National Agriculture Imagery Program. But in short, what they end up being are these 4-band images that contain a lot of data and tend to be higher resolution than what we can get for Sentinel imagery. So they're an awesome tool for us to use, especially to have as a background map as we're making maps and looking for different layers to create zone maps, drainage maps, etc.
Right. So this imagery is a better resolution, a higher resolution than a lot of the satellite imagery data that we're dealing with. If my memory serves me correctly, the Landsat data that we commonly use is 30-meter resolution. The Sentinel data that we use is commonly 10-meter resolution data. And I believe the NAIP imagery is supposed to be mandated to be about 1-meter resolution. And you can find places where you can actually find even more detailed imagery than that if the state that you're working on has chosen to go to a higher resolution.
Absolutely. And as you mentioned, that there can be differences in terms of resolution between states. And I'll say this too, like even working with a 1-meter NAIP image, it's really nice compared to working with a 10-meter Sentinel image. So even the 1-meter is very nice to have. But yeah, you can find all the way down to 0.6 meters and 0.3 meters. But another difference that you can sometimes find from state to state is the frequency of how often these are collected. Some states may collect them every 5 years or 3 years, or they may change the pattern in which they're collecting them. So they may go from yearly to every other year, etc. For example, in North Dakota, or North Dakota is kind of a special state in that for the last number of years, there have been NAIP images collected every single year, which is really nice to have as things change and move. But some states, it's every other year. Some states, it's every 3 years.
That's really interesting. So some states you will get the frequency of imagery taken every year. In some states, it will be every other year. Can you help me understand? I think you said something earlier about 4 bands. What does that mean to have 4 bands collected?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So when we think about what we're collecting when these photographs are taken are bands of light. And the really common bands that we think of are RGB or red, green, blue. And that 4th band is the infrared band. And so with that 4th band, that allows us to calculate NDVI. And so not only are these background images really great just to have good photography of fields, but because they also have that 4th band, that infrared band, we can also calculate NDVI. So sometimes if the aerial image is taken during the part of the cropping season that would work well in a zone map, you could use that NAIP image to not only like make a background image, but also use that as a layer for creating a zone map or any other GIS image or GIS creation. But speaking about that, before we started this episode, we had talked a little bit about when they take these images, they usually try to take them leaf on. What does that mean? Leaf on.
The leaf on portion of it, if you look at a lot of the data that comes from the USDA NAIP program, for example, the information sheet that we found on the NAIP program from August of 2013, it talks about the NAIP program acquiring leaf-on aerial imagery, meaning that it's getting collected during the peak of the growing season, or at least that's the goal of when they're hoping to have these images taken. And that's a very important thing, especially if you are trying to use this imagery for vegetative indices, an indication of crop growth across the field. So that leaf on and the time of the year that they are taking that imagery is still really important. Keep in mind, as opposed to our satellite imagery, again, the NAIP imagery is only taken one time a year, and satellites are taking multiple times a year. So when I use NAIP imagery and making zones, I do like to try to kind of estimate what time of the year I think that image actually was taken and decide whether that image does actually have value for describing crop growth in the field. I have seen NAIP images that are an excellent indicator of crop growth and can be a great descriptor of the variability of that a field has. However, I have also worked with imagery that perhaps might have been taken immediately after a small grain harvest, for example, in which case the crop is already removed. There might be a lot of other crops around that small grain field that are still very green in nature, but for the particular field that I'm working on that just had the small grains removed or taken off of the field, it's not going to be the greatest indicator. How does the USDA use this NAIP imagery for themselves? I mean, commonly, where do farmers end up running into NAIP imagery?
As a farmer, you might be familiar with this NAIP imagery as, part of your background maps that you get from FSA. When you go into certified acres and confirm your common land units, the NAIP images that are collected are meant to help supply the data for this. So that's where you'll probably see them as a farmer. And again, if the FSA is trying to create those CLUs, they have to have images that are very geospatially referenced so that they can make those accurate and have good measurements. Because of that, as a side effect of having to have those images done for the farm program, we as geospatial practitioners get the benefit of having those really nice images to work with for our purposes too.
Absolutely. So, Jodi, in your practice of making maps, and zone maps in particular, or drainage maps, or whatever kind of maps you're making, how do you like to use NAIP imagery as you're making maps?
I use NAIP, as I think about it, I probably use NAIP more than I think I do, but it's always the image. Or what I try to do is I try to use or find the newest NAIP image that has a good contrast between the boundary of the field so that I can draw the boundary for that field and then use it as the official boundary for the field. And then I also like to use NAIP imagery, especially in states that have a pretty high frequency of them. So at least every other year, I like to just look through those images because they come in as RGBs in ADMS. So I like to look through those and look to see, are there any common things that are popping up year over year. So I like to use this as a reference point. And then also for some older satellite imagery from Sentinel and especially Landsat, if I'm seeing that there's some issues with the Sentinel imagery, older Sentinel imagery, or Landsat images not matching up to where there's sloughs in the field, I will use a NAIP image that I know is georeferenced. Then I might move that Sentinel image after I've already pulled it down from the online imagery library or elsewhere, just to match it up and make sure that things are lining up as they should. So I use the NAIP images a lot, to be quite frank. Is there anything else too that you use NAIP images for when you're making maps, Sarah?
I think we use them very commonly together. It is my favorite layer to draw tillage boundaries off of because the NAIP images are georeferenced quite well, and so I do find it to be the most reliable image to draw boundaries from. I also use them to help me evaluate how good my zones are that I have created. So I will usually download most of the NAIPs that exist for a field that I'm working with and the proposed zones that I'm going to send out for somebody to look at before they're finally approved. I will turn those zones on over the top of the NAIP images and see how the variability components match up with what is in that field. It helps me to know whether I'm finding the areas of lower productivity or greater productivity. though they will show up in the NAIP images very well. You will be able to visually see them many times. So it's very helpful from that standpoint. Keep in mind, this is very high resolution data. It's very highly valuable data, and yet it is provided to us for free in the United States. So you yourself can go out and download this data. We at GK Technology have these data available on our servers. We've already downloaded it and have it available for you to use.
Even though, NAIP images aren't created for us to use as precision agriculture practitioners, it is a highly valuable data layer. And all of us that work in this line really should be taking advantage of it. It's a free asset, and we are extremely lucky here in the United States that we can get access to it and have it readily available.
Tune in next time for a tiny bite of knowledge from GK Technology, where we have a map and an app for that.
Let the geeks at GK Technology help you with your agricultural data. Their agronomists know agriculture. When it comes to creating soils and zone maps to maximize yields in your fields, you can trust the people with decades of experience in site-specific agriculture. Everyone at GK Technology has a background in agriculture, so they know what makes a farm run, and they speak your language. The geeks at GK Technology have a map and an app for that.